HOA Karen banned my solar pool heater, so I turned her pool into an ice rink. Entitled people. It was the kind of heat that turns pool water into soup and tempers into weapons. That's probably why I didn't immediately question why Karen from across the street came stomping over in her flip-flops like she was marching to war. I was lounging beside my recently installed solar pool heater, my pride, my weekend project, and my personal declaration of independence from absurd utility bills. She didn't even bother with a hello. She just jabbed a manicured finger at the shiny black panels and said, "That thing is ruining the neighborhood aesthetic." I blinked at her, squinting through the sunlight. My yard. My pool. My heater. She sniffed dramatically, arms crossed. We have standards in this neighborhood. That contraption is an eyesore. I've already filed a complaint with the HOA. She didn't actually live in the HOA. But her best friend was the HOA president, so she acted like she ruled all 9 houses in our cul-de-sac. I sat up, drying my hands on a towel. It's a solar heater, Karen. It helps the environment. It keeps my electric bill under control. It's literally not hurting anyone. It's hurting my view. Her view was the corner of my fence if she leaned out her upstairs bathroom window. But logic was never her strongest muscle. Control was. She wanted the neighborhood to stay exactly how she approved it. Bland, vanilla, beige everything, no deviation, no joy. The complaint letter arrived 3 days later. The HOA president, her friend, Tiffany, wrote that the solar heater violated the community aesthetic. The community aesthetic apparently included trampolines, 6 different mailbox styles, and Jeff's glorious Flamingo Army display each summer. But renewable energy? Absolutely not. I laughed when I read it. I appealed. Provided documentation. Wrote a neatly formatted explanation. I even baked cookies to bring to the board meeting. Then they lost my paperwork. Next thing I knew, I woke up one morning to the sound of power tools. The HOA hired contractors to remove my heater without warning. I ran outside in my pajamas, just in time to see them loading it into a truck. Karen stood on the sidewalk, sipping iced tea like she was attending a parade thrown in her honor. "What are you doing?" I shouted. She smiled with her whole face, the kind of smile that told you she'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. "Rules are rules." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a breath and said, "This isn't over." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh please. It's just a pool heater. Don't be dramatic." That was rich, coming from the human embodiment of dramatics. I replaced the heater. A newer model. Sleeker. Even more energy efficient. I installed it early on a Saturday morning before anyone woke up. I sat in my pool that afternoon with a triumphant grin on my face. Then I heard the sirens. 2 HOA board members arrived with a security guard who looked like he deeply regretted his career choices. They issued me a violation. $500 fine for the offense of unsanctioned solar equipment. I paid the fine but filed an appeal again. More documents. More photos. More meetings. Denied. Karen watched each setback like it was a live-streamed reality show made just for her. I could practically hear popcorn crunching whenever I looked in her direction. Weeks passed. Summer peaked. My pool temperature dropped without the heater. Meanwhile, Karen's backyard looked like a resort brochure. She had a pristine in-ground pool with underwater lights, a waterfall, heating jets, and a floating bar setup. Every Friday evening she hosted neighborhood family night. I was never invited, but I could hear her bragging across the fence about how some people just didn't belong. Then came the HOA invoice. They were billing me for storage of the confiscated heater. Monthly. I stared at the letter, mouth hanging open. They take my property, store it against my will, then charge me for the privilege? And Karen had the audacity to walk past my driveway that very morning, humming, "Don't worry, you'll comply eventually." I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. There's a difference. I spent a week planning. Research. Sketches. Phone calls. A visit to the hardware store that left a cashier questioning my sanity. I even consulted an HVAC specialist who tried to convince me not to do what I was clearly going to do anyway. In the end, everything was in place. Operation Silence the Sun. On a breezy Thursday evening, while Karen and her friends hosted yet another pool party complete with tiki torches and children screaming about floaties, I was busy rerouting a system I had meticulously built. My new setup didn't heat anything. It cooled. Hard. I installed commercial-grade heat pumps, redirecting airflow through a hidden coil system. Liquid nitrogen tanks were positioned under a disguise of patio furniture. I wasn't messing around. I climbed onto my porch roof with a line of sight to her pool. She'd left her gate open like always. The hose I carefully fed through the fence was already connected. Everything ready. All it needed was a single flip of a switch. I hesitated for just a moment, asking myself if revenge was petty. Yes, that was the point. I flipped the switch. The machine hummed. A distant rush of air. A faint mist drifted across her yard. At first, no one noticed. Kids kept splashing. Karen kept bragging about her perfectly maintained pool. Then the water changed. A thin crust formed. Someone screamed. A teenager tried to climb out and slipped. Karen gasped like she had discovered the apocalypse happening in her backyard. The pool surface hardened rapidly, frost racing out like white lightning, turning her shimmering blue status symbol into a solid sheet of ice. Karen shrieked my name. I smiled and waved. Not a single word spoken. Not yet. Her friends scrambled out, dripping and confused. Karen's husband slipped while trying to chip the ice with a pool skimmer that snapped instantly. Panic spread like wildfire as the frost widened across her glamorous little empire. For once, Karen didn't have the right words, just angry noises. She pointed at me, voice cracking. "Turn it off." "I'm not touching anything," I called back. "Nature's unpredictable." She grabbed her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're sabotaging my property." I pressed record on my own phone. "Say it louder." "The internet can't hear you." A few neighbors peeked over fences. Not to help, just to witness. Karen's meltdown was neighborhood entertainment. Within minutes, the community security guy showed up. Again. He surveyed the frozen pool, the hose, Karen shrieking, and me sipping lemonade. "Sir, did you cause this?" he asked. "I improved energy efficiency," I said. "Is efficiency a crime now?" Karen shoved him. "Arrest him. He's violating everything." He blinked. "I don't think frozen water counts as vandalism." Police eventually came, took statements, and left Karen furious and empty-handed. The ice slowly softened, leaving cracks in more than just the pool surface. As she glared daggers across the fence, I smiled back without a word. Revenge wasn't complete. Not even close. This was only the opening move. The next round would be colder, sharper, and perfectly planned. Soon. I knew Karen wouldn't let the ice incident melt quietly into neighborhood gossip. Sure enough, before the sun had risen the next morning, a certified letter sat crammed inside my mailbox like a snake ready to strike. Another HOA violation. Unapproved temperature manipulation of neighboring water features. That was a new one. Someone was really testing the limits of creativity. I carried the letter inside and set it beside my coffee maker while I brewed the strongest caffeine dose legally sold. Through the kitchen window, I saw Karen pacing in her driveway wearing sunglasses like she was hiding from paparazzi, though the only camera around was the doorbell camera I'd recently installed. She spotted me and immediately marched across the street. I opened my sliding door before she could knock, because I didn't have the patience for her knuckles on my woodwork. "We need to talk," she said, like a villain in a bad soap opera. "I'm listening." She lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper. "You humiliated me." "I did no such thing. I merely demonstrated the advantages of advanced cooling systems." "You froze my pool. And technically, it thawed." She pointed at the ground as if that gesture alone would condemn me to eternal HOA punishment. You think you're so clever, but Tiffany is calling an emergency board meeting tonight. We're going to rewrite the policies to cover this kind of behavior. Behavior like physics? I asked. Karen ignored the comment. They'll impose new fines. Real fines. Ones you can't afford with your little science experiments. She smirked, waiting for me to panic. I didn't. Instead, I sipped my coffee. Good luck with that. Solar tech and energy efficiency are protected under state law. You might want to do a little reading before you blow a gasket. Her face twitched. No one threatened Karen's imaginary power. She stepped closer. If you keep this up, I'll make your life miserable. I raised an eyebrow. You mean this isn't miserable already? She stomped off, muttering something about lawyers and Article 9. I watched her speed walk away and wondered if she kept a binder labeled Neighborhood Compliance War Plans. The day passed quietly, but the tension hung thick like humidity before a storm. By late afternoon, I saw HOA members trickle into Karen's living room for the emergency meeting. They carried clipboards, dissatisfaction, and a moral superiority complex larger than the community map. I didn't attend. I had something better planned. While Karen attempted to rally her loyal foot soldiers, I visited the city building department. There, I met an angel disguised as a clerk named Ramon, who took one look at my paperwork and smiled knowingly. "You're the guy with the frozen pool," he said. "Is that my legacy now?" He chuckled and guided me through forms that would document everything the HOA was illegally doing. Taking my property without due notice, imposing biased rules, selectively enforcing aesthetic. By the time I was done signing, I had a neat packet titled Formal Complaint. HOA Overreach and Property Rights Violations. A beautiful phrase. I left the office feeling like I'd just weaponized paperwork. When I returned home, the meeting at Karen's house was wrapping up. People filtered out with exaggerated nods of agreement while Karen stood on her porch, head high like a dictator admiring her loyal regime. Tiffany spotted me across the street and called out. "We'll be sending revised policy notices soon," she announced. "Oh good," I replied. "I love collecting those. Really brightens the kitchen." Karen made a face like she'd bitten into a lemon. She wasn't expecting confidence. She expected fear. Night rolled in. Sprinklers clicked on. The neighborhood went dark, quiet, fake peaceful. I lay awake thinking, plotting. Karen escalated, so I would escalate too. But the next move had to be perfect. Not just technological mischief. Something official. Something that chipped away at her throne. The perfect opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. 2 days later, a water maintenance crew showed up at my house unexpectedly. They informed me that the HOA had requested an audit of suspicious usage. Apparently, the ICE operation had raised concerns. They checked meters and pipes and backyard access points. All legal because the HOA owned the easement lines. Karen stood nearby with her phone out, filming like she was documenting a criminal sting. When the workers finished, they reported no issue. But Karen wasn't satisfied. "There must be something," she snapped. "He's stealing water or hacking the grid or—" The lead worker cut her off. "Ma'am, water doesn't get hacked." He climbed into his truck and left Karen to stew in her own dissatisfaction. I thought that would be the end of the morning drama. I thought wrong. That afternoon, I heard splashing and shouting. Karen's pool crowd had returned. The water was warm again thanks to a rapid heat system she paid a fortune for. She blasted music and encouraged everyone to enjoy the pool while it's still legal. Her passive-aggressive announcements echoed through the cul-de-sac like a megaphone of entitlement. I kept my distance. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait and listen. Then the screaming started. Not excited kids screaming. Actual screaming. I sprinted outside. Karen's pool lights flickered violently and buzzed. Someone yelled that there was an electrical surge under the water. People scrambled for the ladder, slipping in panic. A few climbed out crying. Karen shrieked for someone to do something. Her husband sprinted into the house to flip breakers, while Karen's perfect pool party turned into a chaos show. Finally, the current cut out and the danger subsided. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. But her guests scattered like she was hosting a murder mystery that got too real. I stood on my lawn, arms crossed, watching her meltdown unfold. She noticed. "This is your fault," she screamed. "How exactly?" I asked. "Last I checked, I don't control your wiring." "You cursed my property," she hissed. "If I could curse anything," I said calmly, "it would be your email access so you couldn't submit any more bogus complaints." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again, confusion and fury mixing like bad lemonade. Hours later, the HOA sent another letter. This time, they accused me of sabotaging community harmony. I pinned that one onto my refrigerator like a trophy, but something about the electrical issue nagged at me. I may have declared neighborhood war, but I never put lives at risk. Someone else made a dangerous mistake, and Karen was too stubborn to see that her obsession with combating me was turning her pool into a hazard zone. Time for information gathering. I waited until nightfall, then slipped on gloves, grabbed a flashlight, and did a little boundary investigation. Her pool filter system sat dangerously close to some wiring that looked improvised. Exposed junctions, corroded staples, wires rubbing against metal. Someone had tampered. Not me. Not the city. Karen. In her rush to reinstall heating features after the freeze, she must have hired the cheapest electrician she could find, or tried to DIY something beyond her skill set. Her need to stay perfect made her reckless. That's when the idea arrived. A slow grin carved its way onto my face. Karen thought she could bury me in legal documents? Fine. I'd bury her in safety regulations. Early the next morning, I filed another report, this time specifically targeting unsafe electrical modifications near a public-use water environment. City inspectors would be obligated to shut down her pool pending a full inspection. Not illegal revenge. Smart revenge. A day later, my doorbell rang. I answered to find Karen fuming in her robe, hair wild. "What did you do?" she hissed. "I followed the rules," I said. "Isn't that what you wanted all along?" Across the street, two inspectors stood examining her pool system. One shook his head. The other took photos. Karen stormed home and shrieked at them, but the inspectors ignored her tantrum. Eventually, they taped an orange notice to her gate. "Pool closed. Safety violation." Karen ripped it down, but the message was already delivered. Her kingdom was officially condemned. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because this wasn't the finale. This was only the moment the Queen realized she could bleed. Karen didn't go quiet after the pool shut down. Of course not. She doubled down. By the next morning, her front yard displayed a freshly printed banner. "Dangerous Neighbor Alert." It featured a cartoonish drawing of a man in overalls holding a wrench like a weapon. The resemblance to me wasn't subtle. She paced beside it, handing out flyers to dog walkers and joggers, warning them about my criminal mischief. One elderly neighbor refused to take a flyer and Karen yelled after her, "Fine. Don't blame me when your water freezes too." Her paranoia had gone full throttle, and the neighborhood watched the unraveling with a mixture of horror and fascination. I could have yelled. I could have threatened legal action. Instead, I brewed my coffee and waved as I stepped onto my porch. "Good morning, Karen. Lovely banner. Really tasteful." She clenched her teeth so hard I thought they might crack. Meanwhile, my pool heater, still illegal in the HOA's opinion, gleamed like a trophy in the sun. I reveled in the petty glory of its existence. But while she spread gossip like fertilizer, I focused on the next move. The city inspector overseeing her pool safety violations seemed sympathetic to my situation. I asked him about the possibility of documenting the HOA's illegal seizure of my original heater. He nodded slowly and told me to schedule an official complaint review. The idea of escalating through legal channels thrilled me. But I knew Karen would attack from every angle while she still could. Sure enough, that afternoon she staged what she called a community town hall, which was actually just 10 confused neighbors sitting on folding chairs in her driveway while she presented a slideshow titled, "Why Solar Pool Heaters Will Destroy Property Value." She pointed laser dots at pictures she'd stolen from my backyard camera feed. "This is a gateway device," she warned. "Today it's solar. Tomorrow he'll install a wind turbine. Then chickens. Then goat. Then who knows?" A man in the back raised his hand. "Goats would be nice. My grandson loves goats." Karen nearly imploded right there. I didn't even need to sabotage her. She was doing a terrific job of that herself. Still, I wasn't going to rely on her self-destruction alone. I started gathering statements from anyone willing to admit the HOA played favorites, especially when those favorites were Karen's. Jeff, the flamingo enthusiast, was more than willing. She tried to get animal control called on my lawn display because she claimed they attracted predators. "She's the predator." He signed the form like he was autographing a concert poster. Others followed. Some quietly slipped statements into my mailbox under cover of darkness like they feared retaliation from the Queen of Tantrums. By midweek, the HOA sent me another notice. Mandatory compliance review, Thursday at 7 p.m., at their clubhouse. The tone was serious. The threat underlying it was obvious. I prepared meticulously. Laws, research, photos, documentation from the city inspector. I walked in wearing a suit, just professional enough to intimidate them, but casual enough to say I wasn't scared. Karen sat in the front row like she owned the building, Tiffany beside her with a stack of printed fines. I calmly laid out how they ignored due process, violated my property rights, selectively enforced guidelines, and fabricated rule changes specifically targeting renewable energy installations. When I finished, the room was silent except for Karen scoffing under her breath. Tiffany cleared her throat. "While we acknowledge some misunderstandings may have occurred," Karen grabbed the mic. "No. He's manipulating all of you. He's the reason our neighborhood feels unsafe. You all saw what he did. He froze my pool." A man near the back spoke up. "According to the inspector, your wiring was faulty, Karen." That sentence hit her like a brick. She sputtered, trying to regain control, but more neighbors chimed in with complaints about her behavior. The board members exchanged worried glances. For the first time since moving here, the room wasn't orbiting Karen's ego. It thrilled me so deeply I almost smiled. The board agreed to table the ruling until they could review legal counsel's opinion. Translation: they were scared to make a move without backup. Karen stormed out in a fury, slamming the glass door so hard it rattled the windows. I stayed behind long enough to shake hands and thank everyone for listening. On my way home, I saw Karen on her lawn, tearing up brochures while cursing my existence. Her pool still bore the orange shutdown sticker. I felt a glimmer of something like victory blooming in my chest. I knew better than to celebrate early, but it was a taste, a reminder she wasn't invincible. The next morning, retaliation arrived. A city zoning officer delivered a notice stating I needed to remove all unapproved energy equipment until code compliance review. My stomach dropped. Karen had filed complaints at the municipal level, pushing the conflict beyond HOA boundaries. I watched the officer clip a temporary stop work notice beside my heater system. Karen peeked through her blinds, face smug with triumph. She'd found a new battlefield. I wasn't defeated, but the move stung. I paced my yard, weighing next steps while my annoyance simmered into resolve. That night, I visited Ramon again at City Hall. He flipped through the paperwork, frowning. "This complaint, the information is sloppy and contradictory. Looks like someone with half a brain rushed this." We both knew who. He assured me the city would do a proper inspection before forcing removal. I thanked him and headed home through the warm dusk, adrenaline fueling new determination. When I arrived, I discovered Karen had placed another handwritten sign in her yard. "Ask me why my neighbor is a threat." The neighborhood was beginning to look like a political battleground where truth had been replaced with yard art. I decided to give her something real to panic about. That night, while the street was quiet and cicadas buzzed behind fences, I rolled a toolbox to the side of my pool and knelt beneath the heater system. Not to freeze anything, not to sabotage, just fine-tuning. I upgraded the cooling loop to operate with twice the precision, disguised all external lines inside faux landscaping decor, and added noise-dampening insulation so the system would be silent. If the city inspected, they would find flawless workmanship. If Karen tried to spy, she would see nothing but rocks and shrubs. I worked until stars dimmed into the gray of morning. The inspection came 2 days later. 3 officials. Clipboards. Cameras. They tested every valve, every support bracket, every grounding point. One muttered to another, "This is cleaner than most commercial installs." Karen lurked nearby, fists balled at her sides. When the lead inspector finally announced everything was up to code, her eyes widened with disbelief. "There must be something wrong," she insisted. He handed me a signed approval sheet. "Everything is compliant." "Nicely done." Karen's face twisted. She looked betrayed by reality itself. She stormed inside without another word, slamming her door so hard a bird flew off her gutter in protest. By lunch, Karen had vanished from sight. No pacing. No flyers. No parking inspector lurking. The silence made the air feel heavier. I'd taken ground, but a quiet Karen was never a harmless Karen. She was stewing. Plotting. Wounded animals don't withdraw. They prepare to bite. I sat on my patio with lemonade and watched her curtains twitch like haunted eyes. She wasn't done. She would come back bigger. More desperate. And the war wasn't done climbing. Because the next escalation wouldn't just involve neighborhood drama. Karen was about to drag law enforcement back into this mess. And when the authorities stepped in, everything would get much colder. Karen's silence lasted less than 48 hours. I should have known she wouldn't stay dormant. It wasn't in her nature. Karen didn't just crave control. She needed an audience. Without attention, she withered. So when I heard sirens again one muggy Saturday morning, I didn't even rush outside. I simply walked onto my porch with my coffee already in hand, as if I'd predicted this moment on the weather forecast. A police cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac, lights spinning but siren off. The officer stepped out with that tired expression people get when they've dealt with too many neighborhood dispute. Karen sprinted toward him, yelling before he could even shut the door. "There he is. Arrest him. He's a dangerous saboteur." The officer blinked. "Ma'am, we're here because someone reported illegal chemical storage." I almost spat out my coffee. Illegal chemical storage? It took me a second to connect the dots. Liquid nitrogen. The tanks were stored properly and certified for private use, but Karen must have described them as something from a terrorist documentary. She gestured wildly toward my backyard like she expected the officer to find a meth lab. I guided him to the side gate calmly. "Everything is permitted and documented. Feel free to inspect." He followed me, stepping cautiously like he expected pits of venomous snake. I unlocked the equipment housing. Clean. Legal. Labeled. He examined every tank, checked the serial codes against a database on his tablet, and nodded. "All good. Nothing illegal here." Karen was waiting when we emerged. "Well? Did you find his chemicals of mass destruction?" "No, ma'am," the officer sighed. "Everything is compliant clearly." Karen sputtered. But he froze my pool." "That's not illegal," he said. "It's weird, sure. Not illegal." He left with paperwork and a look that said he hoped he'd never return. Karen stared at me, breathing hard, eyes full of static. She stormed back into her house and slammed the door. Round one of the day, me. But Karen never accepted a single loss. She needed a new weapon. And unfortunately, she found one. That evening, the HOA sent a letter declaring an emergency vote on community safety infrastructure codes. The kind of codes designed to outlaw anything new and force me to remove everything I'd installed. The vote would be held the very next day. No time for appeals. No time to rally support. Karen was going all in. I spent the evening knocking on doors, explaining calmly, showing documents, offering lemonade while I laid out how dangerous unchecked HOA power could become. Some neighbors nodded sympathetically. Others avoided choosing a side because they didn't want to get on Karen's bad list. Understandable. But I could tell momentum was shifting. The next morning, the vote began. Neighbors gathered in the clubhouse, plastic chairs, lukewarm coffee, and the kind of tension usually reserved for courtroom dramas. Karen stood at the podium in a blazer that looked one size too small, clutching a binder thick enough to qualify as a weapon. She launched into a speech dripping with exaggeration. Our community is under attack by a rogue technologist threatening our safety and children's future. Technologist. That was new. I almost thanked her for the promotion. She clicked a remote, revealing slides of my backyard, zoomed in until the pixels were the size of brick. These devices are hazardous. They're dangerous. They're unpredictable. They attract pests. She pointed to a blurry squirrel near a hose line like radioactive. Finally, it was my turn. I stood calmly. No slides. No theatrics. Just facts. I explained how my systems were energy efficient, cost-saving, environmentally responsible. I reminded them the city inspector approved everything. I outlined the HOA's pattern of targeted harassment and how it set a dangerous precedent for everyone. A few heads nodded. Karen saw it. Her confidence wavered for the first time. Tiffany announced the vote. Each household wrote on a slip, "Support HOA expansion of safety codes or oppose." The room grew painfully quiet as people scribbled. My heart thumped, not with fear, but with anticipation. Votes were counted behind a closed door. Karen emerged with a triumphant smile plastered across her face. Too soon. Tiffany followed, pale. The motion, Tiffany cleared her throat, failed. Opposition holds majority. Karen gasped. What? Who voted against? Who? Tell me. Tiffany refused. Karen pointed wildly. It was you. And you. Traitors. People shifted away from her as if her rage was contagious. Someone whispered, "She needs a hobby." Karen stomped out, shaking from the public humiliation. I exhaled slowly. Progress. But the victory felt fragile. Karen wasn't broken, only cornered. And cornered people lash out. Sure enough, at 3 a.m., loud banging jolted me awake. I grabbed my phone and rushed to the door. Karen stood there with a flashlight, hair like a tornado warning, screaming. "You're destroying my life." Karen, go home. You think you've won? This isn't over. I will shut you down. She shoved a stack of papers into my chest. New complaints. Printed at an hour when everyone should be sleeping. I didn't react. I refused to give her the thrill of seeing me rattled. I calmly shut the door while she shrieked on the other side. The next morning, she escalated again. A tow truck arrived and began hooking up my pickup parked in my own driveway. I rushed outside. "What do you think you're doing?" The driver shrugged. "HOA says you're blocking access frontage." "That's not even real terminology," I snapped. He hesitated when I showed proof of property boundaries. Karen ran out, waving another clipboard. "Tow it. Do your job." "I'm not risking a lawsuit," the driver muttered. He unhooked the truck and left Karen standing in the street, screaming profanities that definitely weren't in the HOA rulebook. Even the mailman avoided her after that. But all chaos has a tipping point, and we reached it that evening. I noticed the hose at the back of her yard snaking toward her pool equipment. It wasn't connected to her water system. It was connected to mine. My access line. Karen was siphoning water. I walked to the fence. "Karen, why is my hose hooked to your pump?" She didn't answer. She pretended not to hear. Fine. If she wanted to mix our systems, she would get precisely what she'd earned. I returned to my patio control panel. My upgraded cooling system sat silent, waiting. I checked the connections. Triple confirmed. Looked once more at her backyard. She'd crossed a physical boundary. So I crossed one too. I flipped the switch. Frost shot through the hose in a whip of cold vapor. Her pool churned, bubbled, and then locked into a sheet of white, even faster than before. Chairs frosted. Lights dimmed. Her gazebo roof sparkled like a castle in winter. And her scream, oh that scream, rang like victory. Within minutes, police returned. Neighbors gathered. Karen, shaking with rage and cold, pointed at me. "He's attacking my property again. Arrest him." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, you illegally tapped his water system. That makes any effects your responsibility." Karen's face collapsed into a mask of disbelief. She finally realized she'd frozen herself. And this time, the consequences wouldn't melt away so easily. Karen's scream echoed long after the crowd dispersed. Her pool, once the center of her self-appointed royalty, was now a shimmering frozen monument to her own actions. The orange safety violation notice had been replaced with a red one. Unauthorized modifications. Do not use. The police warned her that tapping into another property's water system could result in charges. Every neighbor heard. Every neighbor whispered. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. Pressure on Karen, building like a volcano under glass. I thought she might retreat. Heal her pride. Maybe take a vacation. Instead, she vanished into her house for 3 full days. Curtains shut. Car unmoved. No flyers. No pacing. No sudden bursts of shrieking. The calm felt unnatural. Like waiting for a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. Even the HOA board tiptoed around, unsure which side to stand on. Tiffany, the president, walked past my driveway with a look that was part apology, part dread, part, I regret ever running for HOA. On day 4, the storm broke. 2 black SUVs rolled into the cul-de-sac right after sunrise. Government plates. Men in uniforms stepped out. City code enforcement, property compliance officers, and someone carrying a clipboard that looked expensive. Karen emerged from her house wearing a perfectly ironed blouse and a smile far too wide to be healthy. She pointed at my yard like she was leading a criminal raid. "There. Shut it all down." The lead inspector nodded politely. "We received multiple reports of unlicensed refrigeration systems and pressurized tank. We're here for a full compliance investigation." Multiple reports. Karen had been busy. I met them calmly. Offered water bottles. Showed permits. Guided them through every installation point. Ramon from City Hall even arrived mid-inspection, shaking my hand like we were old friends. He pointed out mistakes in the complaint notices. Sloppy, desperate mistakes. "This won't hold up," he whispered. Karen lingered at the fence, pacing like a coach waiting for the referee to call a foul. The inspectors thoroughly examined everything. They muttered technical terms, took photos, measured, scanned. Then finally, after nearly 2 hours, the lead officer cleared his throat. "Everything is compliant. This equipment is safe, professionally installed, and within legal rights. We'll be closing all pending complaints." Karen's mouth opened, then stayed that way. Like her brain couldn't generate words fast enough to express her outrage. "That's impossible," she snapped. "He's a menace." The officer held out a stack of documents. "If you continue submitting knowingly false reports, penalties may apply. We suggest you discontinue harassment." Harassment. A beautiful word when spoken by authority. Karen took a step back. Her face trembled with a silent scream she couldn't afford to release with officials present. The SUVs left. The officers left. Ramon left, giving me a thumbs up. Silence returned. Then Karen spoke, voice low, trembling. "You don't understand. I can't lose." She turned away and walked inside. For the first time, she sounded scared. That fear quickly mutated into something far worse. The very next morning, I discovered a crack in one of my solar panels. Not accidental. A clean, intentional strike. A rock lay nearby. A second panel was chipped. 3 more scraped. The kind of vandalism someone does after thinking about it all night. No witnesses. No camera pointing in that exact direction. Karen denied it, of course. Maybe a bird dropped a stone, she said with a shrug that could curdle milk. I filed a police report anyway. The responding officer took one look at Karen glaring from her patio and wrote everything down with extra detail. 2 days later, I found my mailbox smashed. The day after that, someone poured sugar into my truck's gas tank. My sprinklers were ripped out. A sign was left stuck in my yard. Move before you destroy us all. She wasn't fighting the HOA fight anymore. She was fighting for her world not to change. I represented change. Innovation. A future she didn't control. And fear made her feral. But fear also makes people careless. I installed additional cameras. High-resolution, night vision, motion track. I hid trail cams inside bushes facing the property line. I wasn't waiting for another act of sabotage. I was inviting it. On the 5th night, she arrived. She crept across the grass in dark clothes, hood up, clutching a crowbar. Every step jittery with obsession. She reached the side of my pool equipment, my newest panel unit, and raised the crowbar. I stepped outside and hit the porch light. Karen. She froze like a guilty raccoon. That's private property destruction, I said. Her voice cracked. You're ruining everything. You're turning this neighborhood into something else. Into what? Efficient? Modern? Less under your thumb. Tears glimmered, but not sad ones. Rage tears. The kind fueled by losing power you never deserve. You can't win, she whispered. That's the thing, I replied. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live. Police sirens rolled in moments later. The cameras recorded everything. Karen didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply dropped the crowbar and let the officers handcuff her like she had expected this ending all along. She was charged with criminal mischief and property damage. They placed a no-contact order between us. The HOA immediately called for a vote to remove her from all committees. The neighborhood watched from porches as she was guided into the back of a patrol car, the same way she used to watch others with smug delight. As the car door closed, she met my eyes through the window. There wasn't hatred this time. There was fear. Fear of losing her position. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of the community realizing they never needed her. The car drove away. For the first time in months, the air tasted like victory. But victory wasn't enough. Not for what she put me through. Not for stolen heaters, bogus fines, social attacks, vandalism, and countless attempts to destroy my peace. No. The finale needed to be poetic. And poetic justice is best served cold. So when winter arrived, our first cold snap of the year, I began planning the final move. Something permanent. Something the HOA couldn't overturn. Something that would ensure Karen never regained influence here again. Because while she was banned from approaching me, she still owned that massive pool, a monument to her pride and the scene of her downfall, a hazard, a money pit, a reminder to everyone of her failures. I had the perfect idea. I called my lawyer. I called Ramon. I filed new paperwork with the city. I prepared documents citing community safety hazards and voluntary municipal donation agreement. If everything went according to plan, Karen would return from her legal mess to discover one horrifying truth. Her precious pool wouldn't belong to her anymore. Not legally. Not officially. She would find out that the pool she worshipped, the pool she weaponized, the pool she destroyed herself trying to protect, now belonged to me. After Karen's arrest, quiet settled over the cul-de-sac like snowfall. Neighbors walked slower, voices hushed, as if the air might shatter. I went back to routine, pretending life was normal again. But normal doesn't return when someone like Karen has shaped the landscape. Her house still stood across from mine, rigid and judgmental. Her frozen, condemned pool waited like unfinished business. She was released a few days later, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She moved like someone carrying a cracked mirror version of herself. She no longer barked orders or waved clipboards. She didn't even glare at me, which was more unsettling than anger. Meanwhile, my plans were moving quietly through bureaucratic channels. The city had agreed her pool was a long-term hazard if left untreated. Ramon told me paperwork was progressing faster than expected. The legal strategy was annoyingly clever, even by my standards. The city allowed homeowners to donate unusable structures to municipal oversight to avoid ongoing fines. Normally, it applied to abandoned sheds or derelict garden ponds. In this rare case, the structure in question was a luxury in-ground pool. Karen's pool had racked up code violations she couldn't afford to fix. She would also be responsible for massive drainage and safety remediation costs. My attorney explained the choice in a single sentence. Either she keeps paying forever, or she signs it away. All I needed was her signature, witnessed and notarized. She didn't know the document transferred ownership entirely to me afterward. The city would think it belonged to them, but they would immediately reassign stewardship to me as the volunteer maintainer. I would hold the deed to her downfall like a prize. Karen, however, believed she was escaping a financial trap. The day she signed was painfully ordinary. No threats, no screaming, no HOA banners flapping like angry wings. She simply opened her door when I knocked and stared without emotion. Her hair was unbrushed, and her eyes looked exhausted. I held the papers and a pen, wearing what I hoped passed for a neutral expression. "This resolves your pool fines," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Once signed, the city handles everything." She barely skimmed the text, desperate to be done. Her hand shook slightly as she scribbled her signature. When she finished, she didn't ask questions. She didn't even look up. She just handed back the pen and walked away like someone surrendering their last illusion of control. I thanked her, though she was already closing the door. The transfer processed within a week, astonishing even the clerk who filed it. Official paperwork arrived in my mailbox stating the pool was now under my authority. It called me designated safety custodian, which translated to owner with a noble hat. The pool was still scarred from the last freeze, surfaces cracked like old porcelain. I stood over it, thinking of every insult Karen had ever thrown my direction. Then I thought of every neighbor she belittled, embarrassed, or fined for trivial nonsense. A poetic ending didn't need violence. It needed symbolism. If she hated change, I would make sure change stared at her every single day. I hired contractors to reinforce the base, seal lines, and convert the entire structure. No more water hazards. It would be an outdoor community ice rink, powered entirely by my silent cooling system. The day construction finished, neighbors gathered like children awaiting magic. Lights wrapped around the edges, soft and white, making it glow like winter in a movie scene. A small sign read, "Community Rink, free to enjoy," and the neighborhood buzzed with disbelief. The HOA board showed up, Tiffany included, looking uncertain whether to be angry or grateful. I held up an official approval letter before they could speak. "It meets every code," I said, "and it adds recreational value." Kids rushed forward with skates and helmets borrowed from garages. Some adults joined, laughing despite the strangeness of the situation. Everyone seemed lighter, happier, relieved to have something untainted by drama. Everyone except Karen. She emerged from her house slowly, clutching a robe tight around herself. When she saw her pool, her former pool, filled with joyful chaos, her knees buckled and she sat on her steps. Tears slid down her face without sound. I walked over, stopping a respectful distance away. She looked at me with a mixture of defeat and disbelief. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Revenge had already spoken for me. "Why?" she whispered. The word trembled like she believed there might still be a version of the world where she won. I answered honestly. "You tried to take away my peace. I built something better from it." She stared at the rink as a kid zoomed past, laughing. I could almost see the realization settling over her. The neighborhood didn't need a queen. It needed freedom.